Welcome to the intercultural dilemma of 2025, appropriation or appreciation. It's time to figure out what is cultural appreciation and what is the appropriation of a culture. Before we go into the cases, let's start with the definition of cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation itself is one culture adopting symbols, artifacts, or practices from another. It can be broken down into four different types, which are exchange, dominance, exploitation, and transculturation. We don't have time to go into all the details. We'll just be focusing on cultural exploitation. Now that we understand the basic terminology, here is our first case of appropriation. Have you ever walked into a costume shop and be taken aback by a costume? There are definitely some costumes out there that cause an eyebrow raise and maybe are they allowed to sell that? Here is a recent example of that situation. A costume titled Rasta, beanie with dreads, caught my eye. This type of costume is an issue because it implies the stereotype that dreads equals smoking weed. The costume itself had the name Rasta, which is actually both a name for the religious group called the Rastafarians and a crocheted hat that was originally designed to contain the dreads of the group. Look into the history of the hat, you can find out that each of the colors in the hat symbolize something different. There is red for the blood martyrs in the Black liberation struggle, green for Ethiopia's natural beauty, gold or yellow for Africa's wealth, and black for the African people. This has evolved into a cheap costume that you do with an over-the-top Jamaican accent. The history is completely forgotten, and there are still stereotypes and common perceptions that persist that say to be a Rastafarian you have to smoke marijuana. A dominant culture taking an important element of a less dominant culture is a clear and cut example of cultural exploitation. Turning it into a highly commercialized product also backs up the cultural exploitation. There was no discussion over the history or if it was acceptable to take a part of this culture and monetize it in such a way. There would be a difference if this was instead being appreciated instead of being taken for commercial gain. Now let's move on to another case of cultural appropriation and look into the celebrity world. Celebrities have high fame and powerful reach into different parts of life, often making decisions that sometimes have consequences. We should remember that celebrities are just people who make mistakes. This is not to excuse anyone and say that appropriation is okay. It's not. But we should just remember that celebrities are just human. Now, after saying that, there are people who continuously make choices that end up appropriating other cultures. For example, Gwen Stefani. This is someone who has multiple appropriation controversies under her belt. We are talking over 4+ separate incidences where the public has sent backlash for cultural appropriation. From her time with the Harajuku girls to the time she wore a bindi, something of great historical and marital value as a fashion piece. We will be looking on the band's No Doubts music video titled Looking Hot, in which Gwen Stefani dressed up in Native American inspired clothing and hair accessories, but some of the outfits she wears are short and sexy instead of modest and traditional. Here we have Gwen Stefani in a feathered headdress along with two Native American inspired outfits now labeled as boho chic, which turns the modest attire of this culture into something that is inappropriate and cultural appropriation. The internet was very divided on whether this was actually appreciating the culture or appropriating. Some comments on the group's music video stated that this video was a cultural appropriation extravaganza. And one person who says they are Native American stating, I can understand how people may get offended, but other than the weird representation of the natives, it's alright. The original music video got pulled and the band issued an apology stating they never meant to hurt or trivialize Native American people, their culture, or their history. Explained by the muted group theory, a theory where a less dominant group feels like they cannot speak up against the actions of a dominant group. The muted group here is the Native Americans. Also links back into cultural exploitation under the appropriation umbrella as well. We can see in the comments of this re-upload that there are some people who say that people are just too sensitive, making it harder for those who are upset at the clear cultural appropriation to feel like they can voice their emotions and feelings about the situation.
Now begs the question, why would these cases be intercultural issues? The Rasta hat has strong association with cultural appropriation, with its attached fake dreadlock and multicolored crocheted beanie. Dreadlocks have strong symbolism in Rastafarian culture. The colors are tied to political meaning and linked to resistance, liberation, and African identity. Reducing dreadlocks to a costume removes cultural context and reduces them to stereotypes associated with marijuana. Muted group theory, the commercialization of Rastafarian symbols reflects unequal cultural power, miscommunication, and misrepresentation, as dominant groups often redefine minority symbols and silence the voices of the marginalized. No Doubt's music video had Gwen Stefani dressed in Native American cultural clothing, which led to accusations of cultural appropriation, accusing them of trivializing indigenous cultures and thus perpetuating colonial stereotypes. Regarding cultural identity theory, the video used Native American clothing and their identity as visual entertainment to look exotic or fit an aesthetic, completely disregarding the significance of the clothing and sacred traditions. Appropriating Native clothing is problematic as it is heavily associated with this cultural trauma of Indigenous peoples who have historically been subjected to violence and genocide to destroy their customs to assimilate to white Christian ideals. No Doubt used Native Americans' cultural identity as a costume, reinforcing unequal cultural representation. How they could have done better to appreciate, not appropriate. Cultural appreciation involves learning from other cultures to understand the significance, origins, and history, acknowledging the source community and respecting its uses by seeking permission and guidance when engaging with traditional elements from cultures that don't belong to you. This involves consulting those communities directly to confirm if the usage is respectful and falls within appreciation. If these cases were to be appreciated rather than appropriated, they should. Companies and individuals producing or wearing the beanie should begin by engaging in cultural consultation and learning when using Rastafarian imagery. The Rastafarian movement is spiritually deep, rising in response of British colonialism in Jamaica. Their hair is not a fashion statement. They believe their dreadlocked hair restores the African body, as refraining from cutting their hair is a dedication to God, and also rejects colonial ideas by keeping their African hair in its natural state. The usage of cannabis isn't an edgy choice, rather a sacrament that aids spiritual enlightenment. To respect and show appreciation for Rastafarians, rather than wearing shallow imitation costumes at their expense, would involve acknowledging their history. Brands could collaborate with Rastafarian and Jamaican artists and designers to create authentic and ethically sourced items that celebrate their cultural identity instead of poke fun at them. This will show genuine cultural interaction, as recognizing one's biases involves openness and active engagement with the appropriated culture to rectify past wrongs. In the music video, they could have shown cultural appropriation by consulting and collaborating with Indigenous creatives to ensure the clothing choices were respectful. The feathers in her hair and the Wild West theme, in which Gwen was cast as the Native American princess, captured by her cowboy bandmates, perpetuates a long-tied stereotype of Native Americans as fierce warriors, ultimately conquered by the dominant group. The video came off as her using Native American artifacts as props and portrayed the relationship between Native Americans and cowboys as historically tense, misrepresenting the history of them being civil trade partners. The creative industry has historically underrepresented Indigenous voices in stories and media. Had they consulted Indigenous voices beforehand or included them in the video as representation rather than centering themselves as Native Americans, they wouldn't have had to remove the video after facing scrutiny and issue an apology. They didn't intend to offend anyone, but they didn't once question or reflect on whether what they were representing was appropriate or whether they were perpetuating harmful stereotypes. They lacked intercultural understanding and instead reinforced exoticism. Culturally appreciative example. An example of cultural appreciation is Hayley Williams' performance on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, where she sang her song True Believer, a song about racism and hypocrisy in the church. Hayley Williams is a white woman from a red state who was raised Christian. She saw the disconnect at first hand between white evangelicals' beliefs versus their actions. They say that Jesus is a way, but then they gave him a white face, so they don't have to pray to someone they deem lesser than them. She chose to perform it live to an audience, surrounded by an all-black orchestra, paying homage to African soul while maintaining her artistic identity. She demonstrates a strong example of cultural appreciation through respectful artistic integration. She's a white woman who saw marginalization of Southern Black people and gave them a voice. She didn't appropriate Black culture. She drew inspiration from Black gospel to spread her message. If the voices of Black people are muted, she'll serve as a vessel to have their history heard. The South will not rise again till it's paid for every sin. Strange fruit, hard bargain. Strange fruit is in reference to the hanging of two lynched Black men in 1930s. The term was popularized by Billie Holiday, a Black artist who sang a song condemning racial violence during the Jim Crow era. Haley's use of the term was powerful as she understands the cultural context and USA's violent history, spreading cultural awareness. Her performance acknowledged the musical style without imitating or characterizing it. She focused on shared emotional and cultural expression central to gospel and soul traditions, appreciating Black Americans' culture by collaborating with Black artists, reflecting representation and inclusion, not tokenism. By sharing the stage and crediting Black people, she amplified Black artistry, avoiding the power dynamic seen in mute group theory. She needed to shine light on the issue as a white person in the dominant group. She didn't make herself the focus or speak over others. Therefore, culturally, she appreciated her musical influences. Williams educated herself, collaborated with practitioners, and transparently expressed her influences through the song, showing that appreciation is based on respect, not replication of someone else's culture. The ignorant appropriation of cultural items is no longer acceptable. Complaints about wokeness are increasingly prevalent in the media, claiming that intercultural issues aren't deep, that appropriation isn't a big deal, and that people are too sensitive these days. These accusations are severely lacking in nuance and empathy. We must listen to the silent, marginalized groups, educate ourselves, and take their advice on board to culturally appreciate the artifacts that don't belong to us. This amplifies the voices of mute groups and creates a shared understanding of the value, history, and meaning of cultural artifacts, thus ensuring that historically marginalized cultures are honored instead of exploited or ignored.